Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sharon Lawrence, and I am honored to be the CEO of the California CASA Association. Today, we're bringing you another webinar on fundraising. It's a very important topic. It may not seem so at the beginning, but I have certainly learned over my career how important fundraising databases can be and how you can utilize them in exceptional ways. So we're really fortunate that the Walter S. Johnson Foundation is sponsoring this series of webinars, and I think you'll be very happy that you joined today or are watching at a later time because the information is going to be quite valuable. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to our Chief Philanthropy Officer, Ann Farrell, to kick us off. Ann?
Thank you so much, Sharon. So welcome, everybody. So happy to have you here. Just a few quick reminders. One is that at the end of the webinar, we will put a survey link in the chat, and we hope that you'll respond to that. There'll also be a reminder sent afterwards, but we really love having this feedback for our funder, Walter S. Johnson Foundation, and also just to make sure we're giving you the trainings that you need. Also, in the chat, if you wouldn't mind putting in your name and your CASA program and the database that you use, that will be great and helpful for our speaker to just understand what the range of assets that we have in our network. So with that, I'm happy to introduce you to Eric Pittaresi, and he is going to speak to us today about the power of donor databases. Eric brings nearly 20 years of nonprofit experience. Since 2017, he's been the Director of Philanthropy for Prospect Research and Donor Strategy at the Scripps Research Institute, a very large, important, world-renowned research organization here in San Diego. Prior to that, he worked in data management for the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, for Voices for Children, which is where we met him, and the San Diego Humane Society. So he has worked in many sizes and types of nonprofits. In fact, he was the very first person I hired when I came to Voices for Children in 2010. And he helped me build that development department into what is now, I think, a pretty powerhouse operation for Voices, and something that we're both very proud of. As the data management lead at Scripps, for their development department, he combines his critical thinking and analytical skills, his resourcefulness, and his technical expertise, and is now a true strategic partner to the fundraisers at that big organization. So he knows a lot about databases and how they work, but not just for something big. He's also worked in very small organizations. So that's going to be a wonderful perspective he'll bring to us. He knows, as we know, that data management is important for all nonprofits of whatever size. And today he's going to share some important information about how you can maximize your data to increase your philanthropy and fundraising using whatever platform you have. So do plug into the chat what platform you're using, because that will help us make this tailored to you. Just a quick bio. He's from New Jersey originally. You can tell that a little bit from his accent still. He's lived in California many years. In his spare time, he loves trivia games. He loves to hunt for antiques and collectibles. He's got quite an eye for that. He loves to nature walks with his fiance, loves watching football with his long-suffering fellow New York Jets fans. Sorry, Eric, one day they'll make it. So with that, I will turn it over to Eric with our sincere thanks for his generosity in giving us his time today.
All right. Thank you so much, Ann and Sharon. It's a pleasure to do this presentation. And Ann, you introduced me so well, I feel like I can skip some of my slides. You hit the nail on the head on some of the things I was going to talk about me. So Ann knows me really well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. As Ann and Sharon mentioned, the title of this presentation is Database Health and Optimization, and Why It Isn't So Important to Fundraising. So the main objective of this is so you have a database. Talking about a database could be boring. It's like you don't know what's going in there. But if you're looking at your database just as some boring cardboard box, I'm going to try to convince you that your database can become a treasure chest and really find some hidden gems and really change the future of your organization. As Ann mentioned, I've worn many hats, as all of us in the nonprofit sector, and I've just kind of, began as actually a philanthropy assistant, moved into the database, into my current role at Scripps Research. And Ann actually described it pretty well. And a great thing in terms of prospect management and moves management, not have I only seen it all with the sizes of shops, and budgets and bandwidth. I've served organizations that are very diverse audience. And here's a few very diverse audiences that I've served: medical research, animal welfare, contemporary art, and even my first job out of college was involving Greek life. Very different than medical research. But as Ann mentioned, I had 5 memorable years at Voices for Children, which is the San Diego CASA affiliate. So I worked very closely with both Ann Farrell and Sharon. And it's actually surreal to me to be here today, just to think about when I first met Ann and now being able to do this and seeing how much the Voices for Children and the CASA program has grown in California. It really is an honor to come back to the CASA program and do what I can to, again, try to help it grow. So I do have to give a shout out to Ann Farrell. Whether she knows it or not, I share with other people that she is my strongest mentor. How I work today is very strongly influenced by Ann's own work ethic and what she taught me. And I remember in my interview, I'm paraphrasing here, it's when we were beginning our Serve Every Child initiative. It's before we expanded into Riverside County. She just said something along the lines of this: Eric, we have big plans. It's going to be a long and bumpy road, but it's going to be fun. You're going to see a lot of growth. We're going to pivot. Are you in? And I just remember feeling like a sense of excitement, like, yeah, let's do it. Let's change the world. And at that point, we were a skeleton crew. Over time, the team grew. We improved our processes. And with that, more donations came in, more children were being served, and then eventually Voices for Children even expanded. So some of the bullet points that I learned from Ann Farrell is to be bold and ambitious. Nothing is impossible when you surround yourself with a smart and capable and talented team you can trust. This is one I literally do, and it's relevant to this presentation, and I do this at any meeting that I hold. Anytime someone has an agenda item, always be ready to articulate, how does this task bring us one step closer to our goal? Is it going to bring in more donations? Is it going to enhance relationships? Or is it going to streamline, improve processes? Really think about what you're doing on this team. And if it answers no to all 3, or maybe you have a 4th important question, then you really should be asking yourself why you're doing it. Because it might be just distraction, noise, busy work. We all kind of get caught in some of those things. So anytime I start a new project, I always have to think of Ann in my head, or someone tells me, I want to do this. And I say, as long as it serves one of these 3 purposes, let's go for it. And last, I would be remiss without mentioning that Ann taught me proper grammar, proper manners, and penmanship go a long way. So I just joke that if there's any errors in this presentation, I'm sure Ann will point it out to me. So I did my best to review. Fingers crossed. Some of my current responsibilities, as Ann kind of mentioned, is I'm a key strategic and collaborative partner to increase the success of many different areas. And it's actually a lot of areas that aren't really talking to each other. So I'm kind of this middleman between all these people, making sure that they're on the same page. This includes working with the CEO and the executive office, literally for gifts that are $100 million plus. I work with several major gift officers, both here in California and in Florida, looking for donations of 100,000, million, 5 million, of that range. And then there's also grants, planned giving, annual giving. I also have a partnership with the person who's in charge of our donor relations. And I have a responsibility to make sure all our events are a success. I have nothing to do with setting up the event. I have to do with getting the right people in the room, when the event is happening, making sure the right discussions are happening. And as soon as the event is closed, finished, developing a strategy that makes sense to make sure that we have a follow-up with these people, so we're getting the best return of our investment on these events, because they do take a lot of time. So we want to make sure that we are using our time wisely. Within the prospect management division, there are several areas that I oversee. prospect research, moves management, data enrichment, and strategic initiatives. So in a nutshell, here are some of the things that I've been called. Besides detective, I've been called the CIA, that there's nothing that Eric can't figure out. And I kind of pride myself on that I just have that curious mind that if I can't answer a question, that kind of goes to the next one, that I kind of consider myself a human Google, that I try to pride myself that I won't always know the answer to your question, but I have plenty of resources at my disposal that I know how to use really well. So I might get back to you and find the answer for you. I call myself a wingman because I truly am kind of hand in hand with the fundraisers as they move their prospects through the cycle from identification, qualification, cultivation to hopefully a successful solicitation. So I let everyone know that we're in this together. I call myself a phone a friend because a lot of times a fundraiser will hit an obstacle. This pathway didn't work. I can't get to this person. They're just kind of I'm getting their attention, but it's really been going nowhere. It's kind of been dragging on for the last year. They know that they can always call me up to bounce some ideas off of them. And I'll say, well, have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about doing that? And if we both agree that there's a new strategy worth pursuing, then we go for it. If we say that we exhausted all our pathways and resources, then we close out the prospect and move on. With all that data coming in, I'm also analyzing every opportunity that comes our way, whether it's the success of a fundraising initiative, the success of an event. I'm always crunching the numbers. And that brings us to the last part is with that information, I'm always trying to look, everyone in the office for the most part is thinking about what can we do right now? Who can I call right now? And I'm looking towards the future of what is possible and trying to set up our database to make sure that when we get to that point, a year, 2 years, maybe even 5 years down the line, that we're in a position to answer some of those tougher questions that maybe we couldn't answer today. So Anne mentioned a lot of these, so I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these. I'm a love of animals and of all shapes and sizes. I didn't even know, if you look at the bottom left, I didn't even know there was such a thing as goat yoga. I love travel, fun, and adventure. Just new experiences brings me great joy. As she said, I'm from New Jersey, so I'm a big fan of New York Jets. And if you follow football, it's been a rough life, but I'm hoping for the best this year. I'm hoping for at least improvement. But I've found some great friends, even though the Jets have been terrible for the last decade. I've found some great close friends from that. If you try to play me in one of these games, you're probably going to hate me because it's kind of my strong area, and that's trivia and Scrabble. And one of the things I'm most proud about is one month ago, I finally found the right prospect for me as I asked my girlfriend to marry me. And that's something I want to share with you because within prospect research, I'm doing all this matchmaking, and I finally found the person who was the right match for me. So I'm very proud and happy to share that news. So but before we talk about processes, I first want you to imagine what is possible. I want you to get excited. If done correctly, your database is going to become the smartest employee in your organization. It's going to take out much of the guesswork, and important decisions are now data-driven. Less flying blind, less just kind of throwing it against the wall and seeing what sticks. You're going to find those hidden gems that have been sitting in your database all along and you didn't know it. A lot of times when I work with other organizations, or my experience at working with other organizations, is that a lot of times you kind of tap the same old well, and you really create donor fatigue. That, if you don't have a prospect research data enrichment program in place, everyone's mentioning the same 5 names. But you're like, who else can we ask? We asked that person for $1 million last year. Are we really going to go back to them again for $1 million again? I guarantee you that if you have a large enough database, there are other people that can give that same $1 million. It will take some time to develop that relationship, but you will see a return on investment. Here's just my bold take on philanthropy, and some people might disagree. From my experience, one talented, capable fundraiser, along with one talented, capable either database administrator who has a focus on data enrichment, can do more than just two fundraisers that are just kind of flying blind. That if you have a fundraiser who's well-informed, that has a vetted portfolio of prospects, that person is probably going to be bringing in more donations than if you're just kind of sitting in, just kind of waiting for the phone, someone to call you and be like, I'd like to give you $1 million, a check arrives in the mail. That, sometimes donations do fall in our lap. But I've noticed that when they are data driven, even if you just have one fundraiser in tag team with a strategic partner, they can really work some magic. And the last thing I'll mention about this is, even if you're not thinking about it, artificial intelligence is going to play a vital role in our industry's future. I would say in our society, but in our future as well. It has already begun. I've already participated in it. So now is the good time to make sure that your organization does not get left behind. More about that brighter future. A big part of, I would say, a beginning point of any data enrichment is making sure that you get as many names into your database as possible. So through whatever opportunity, you learn of introductions, people sign up for your website, they're attending your event, whatever you can do, getting names in your database, and especially their addresses, is going to create a snowball effect where if you're just stagnant with this database of maybe 1,000 people, you'd be like, when you create that donor pyramid, you're like, there's really not that much to work with. Over time, if you concentrate on data enrichment, you're going to notice that as you introduce yourself to new prospects, they're all of a sudden going to open up new pathways to new people, and it's going to kind of create that snowball effect. So I've literally seen databases in my case where it started out with like a modest, 60,000, and now we're at over 200,000 prospects, 200,000 suspects in our database. I shouldn't say prospects. That's wishful thinking. You develop an exceptional understanding of your audience. And this is important for many reasons in terms of proper messaging, in terms of, as I have on this list, aligning the right opportunity with the right prospect, identifying who should we be spending our time and energy on. And if we identify someone, saying this person is worth applying this much time because they can make a transformative gift, whereas we can spend this much time, realistic bandwidth, for this person who can bring a $50,000 to $100,000 gift. When I mentioned pathways and open doors are illuminated, all of a sudden your database is telling you information that you never had access. You will realize you are kind of flying blind. And what I mean by that is you will notice that this person is now the perfect prospect, or these 10 people, to create a short list of, here are the 10 perfect people for this building initiative you have. And then it's a matter of, okay, that's great and all, how do I get to them? And then sometimes it's as easy as, well, this person is an active donor, so we do have an active email, phone number, but other times it could be a little more complicated in terms of who in our database do we have to involve in order to get in front of this person. Maybe it's a trustee, maybe it's a loyal donor. There's going to be no more starting from scratch from turnover. I've seen this with a lot of organizations that they have a fundraiser who's developing all these relationships, but none of that information makes its way into the database. So after that person might eventually leave after a few years, all that important, vital information goes out the door with them. A new fundraiser comes in and being like, I don't even know where to start. They find themselves in embarrassing situations where they try the same exact strategy that their person before them tried. Monitoring engagement now becomes possible. What I usually call prospects are leaning in, and sometimes you don't even know it. So you have all these names in your database now. Now, how do you measure who's actually showing interest? Who is opening up our emails and clicking through? Who's at least RSVPing for our events, and even better, attending them? Who is connected to someone that is close to someone who also is engaged? I'll talk a little bit more about this in the presentation, but being able to monitor engagement, it's great if someone can make $1 million gift, but if they're showing that they can make that sizable gift and are already showing in your database they have an interest in what you're doing, that's the perfect prospect. Accurate forecasting and setting realistic metrics to keep on pace and achieve milestones and goals. And that is in terms of setting up dashboards that are useful, weekly, monthly reporting that keeps you on pace for where you envisioning your organization to be. In terms of portfolios and moves management, there's going to be no more stepping on each other's toes. Everyone everyone knows their lanes in terms of these are the 100 prospects I'm going to focus on, where when I know the other fundraisers are going to worry about nurturing, building these relationships. In terms of having a moves management structure, nothing falls through the cracks. If you're just relying on everything in your head, what's going to happen is you're going to realize that you have all these other things that are going on, and you're like, oh shoot, this person's been in my portfolio for the last year, and I've only had one touch with them, that they've been languishing in the cultivation stage, and I really haven't done anything to advance that relationship. Having a moves management structure is going to make that very obvious through reporting and collaborating with the fundraisers to make sure that they're advancing their people through the pipeline. And most importantly, it's going to result in more donations to carry out or enhance your organization's mission. So why is your database a mess? I'm sure as you read some of these, you're like, oh, I can relate to that. So I might be preaching to the choir on some of these, but I'm not going to say like you're helpless, there's nothing you can do. I'm going to say your database is a mess. I've been there, but there is something you can do about it. We've all been there. Duplicate records and coding. Data is inconsistent, wrong, or just not in the right place. There's too much clutter. Over years, everyone doing things their own way. There's irrelevant coding. You find something that appears on reports, some type of code that is from 2010, and you really just have to ask yourself, does this have any applicable purpose for what we're doing right now? At the very least, make it inactive or just get it out of the database entirely. Eliminate all the noise that's going on in your database. You don't have any guides or business rules, so everything is not apples to apples. So when you want to produce a simple list of what should be a simple report, it is either impossible or might take an entire day or two to accomplish, because you're trying to Frankenstein this information of where do I get this information? Where do I get that information? Once you have everything apples to apples, it's almost like a click of the button, and really the report is just right there for you to analyze and share with the fundraising team. Data enrichment is an afterthought. Nobody is thinking about what other important data points could find a home in your database. And I'm definitely going to talk a little bit more in detail about that, because that is very important. So what's holding your department back in terms of thinking, okay, we know where we have to go. What are some of the things that we need, that first need to happen before we even can kind of get into our database? I can't stress this enough. There needs to be buy-in from leadership and understand that this isn't a wouldn't it be nice luxury. It is a necessity to invest in the organization's future. So if you have a good database administrator and he or she knows what he's doing, it can't be that person saying, we have these new processes in place. This is why it's important. It has to either come from even the head of the organization or the head of the department, and making sure that information is, those processes are being enforced, that this isn't an option of how to do things. This is how we're doing things now. It definitely takes some training to get the people to that area, but I've seen it in my current job. It is possible. The flow of prospect information is not being disseminated or recorded properly. And there's many examples of what I mean by that. I will give the example of, okay, the CEO of your organization is having regular phone calls, meetings, maybe even tours with important people, board members, prospective donors. And in those conversations that I'm not in the room with, or your prospect researcher is not in the room, that person, that CEO is learning a lot of important information. They're sharing who else do they know, what they're interested in, some other inclinations of what type of what type of gift this person could make. That information there needs to be a process in place where that CEO or that head of fundraising is making sure, if they don't have the time, it makes sense. A CEO doesn't have the time to record everything in the database, but there needs to be a system in place that it can't just exist in their head. This is important information that is going to inform future strategies. So there needs to be at least a process in place where that person is sharing that information and someone is recording that in the database in a consistent way. Another example is more on the electronic side. Maybe you have a marketing events team and they're having all these great events and you know who is RSVPing, who is attending, you have registration lists, but none of that information is actually finding its way back into your database. So you're missing this golden opportunity to really measure opportunities. You might have too many lone wolves or untrained cooks in the kitchen who like to do things their own way, even though it isn't the right way, because that is the way I've always done it. I've dealt with that before. And that, I would say that just goes for any process in a philanthropy team trying to move forward, trying to achieve what might seem impossible. If people are unwilling to change, it is true, you're going to be held back, that they have to understand that maybe I have to learn new things. And that's kind of the next bullet point here, is people who are afraid, uncomfortable to embrace emerging technologies. It could be overwhelming at times when you introduce a new system in place. But as long as that person is willing to learn and be trained, then that becomes an opportunity to convert that person into someone who is no longer afraid or uncomfortable. I've seen it before. I've walked through people through that point to get them to that comfort zone. They'd be like, okay, now I understand this. This makes sense to me. And then poor time management and organizational skills. I'll share with you a very relevant one with my current organization. We noticed that some fundraisers were saying, there's just not enough time in the day. I'm doing all these things. I'm taking all these phone calls, having all these interactions. The world keeps moving and I don't have any time to just sit down and relax, take a breather and put in this information. Well, the head of our department realized how important that was and said, there is a 2-hour block on every Thursday where you are expected to do nothing but take all the information you learned in the past week and get it into the database. Because in a few days, we're actually all going to look at it and see who actually did what, who created what proposals, brought in what money. If it's not in the database, it doesn't exist. And that actually is a mantra that I've had with all the organizations I've either worked with or consulted with. And Anne was, I remember, very good at that we needed to get all that information into the database. The excuses, I have heard them all and I've been there myself, so I sympathize with you. We have a skeleton crew, or even worse, I'm a one-person show. There are just simply not enough hours in the day. There's so many other things we need to accomplish before we can even entertain this idea. It's so overwhelming, I don't even know where to begin. We don't have the money or the resources. Eric, you're preaching to the choir, but leadership does not agree. And this is what I have to say about that. I'm going to share a quote from Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Instead of focusing on your limitations, envision and prioritize what is possible now to at least get yourself moving in the right direction for a better tomorrow. Baby steps are okay. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, I absolutely realize if you're a two-person shop, it's just not possible. But there are certain things that you can do to get yourself in a place to clean up your database, get more donations coming in that way. And then all of a sudden next year, more things will become possible as you hire more support staff, as you get maybe better resources like wealth screening tools. So never just sit there with your hands up in the air and be like, there's nothing I can do. Because if you believe that, then it's true. There is nothing you can do. So now I'm going to talk about adding color to your prospects. And I'm going to use the comparison of treating your database like a painting. So I'm going to give the example of an organization that I worked at. This is all true information. I just made up XYZ Foundation. So when I started at XYZ Foundation, what I learned during the interview is they said, you know, I could tell it was going well, but they said, Eric, if we hired you, you do realize there's not a book for you to work off of. We'd be hiring you to write the book. And that was the challenge I needed at my point in the career, that I really did want to kind of build something from the ground up, not inherit something, and see what it looks like. And it was a challenge that I was happy to accept. This organization was in a dire financial situation. And if you read about them in the news, it would be, is XYZ Foundation going under? They're too heavily reliant on government grants. As soon as that government grants is pulled, they're probably have nowhere to go. They had a skeleton crew, they had high turnover, and there was just kind of a low morale. And philanthropy was kind of an afterthought at that, kind of the, and like I said, an afterthought at XYZ Foundation. Eventually, the leadership felt the heat and became bold and eventually decided we need to actually look at for our philanthropy team, not just from the fundraiser perspective, but the entire infrastructure. And they made a bold decision that we really need to grow our team. And one part of that was we needed a prospect management division. And I was happy to be the first person to take on that role. Okay, day one. At this point, I've worked with many databases. They use Razor's Edge. I had at that point like 10 years experience of Razor's Edge. And I was just like really overly confident. Let me hit the ground running. Time to work my magic. But when I went into the database, what happened? Where's the data? There's nothing that there's nothing to indicate to me in terms of, I would ask, what has been happening around here for the past 5 years? Because it's not in the database. So I have here starting with a blank canvas. I should kind of go a little further back and actually say starting with a messy canvas before I even arrive at a clean canvas. So the big question was, in my role, how do I advise people where to go if I don't even know where we are at or where we have been? Data was being utilized for the bare minimum and poorly at that. And I'm sure some of you can totally relate to this, that the database was being used for this reason. Check arrives in the mail, a data assistant enters that gift record. Usually everyone does that, hopefully, and they do one of two things. They create a new constituent record, put in their address, their email, or they're updating that record with new information. That is where data enrichment stops. And I've seen it where even that was done poorly with just things being entered in the wrong place. No one was doing the right salutation and things like that. So the bare bones was being done. And the database did look more like a cardboard box than anywhere being close to a treasure chest. So before I even started thinking about the outlines and the painting and the adding of color, I needed to clean the database. And that included database maintenance, decluttering, and standardization to make sure everything was apples to apples. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth into this, but it is very important. It could be its whole other presentation in terms of how to clean up your database, but that really is your first step that I feel like every team can be mindful of, are ways to increase the data integrity and making sure more key information is finding its way into the database. So I knew XYZ was trying to tell us a story, and I guarantee you, your organization is also trying to tell you a story. But everyone might be listening in a different way, and no one is recording it down. So when I mean a story, I just mean everything that happens over the course of many years with your organization in terms of gifts, introductions, learning new things about people, about their interests, about their capacity, the opportunities that are out there. Your organization is trying to tell you a story. And if there's someone at your place that can at least do their best to tell that story in a very standardized way, your database is going to be in a much better place. So how did I do this? How do I fill in those missing outlines? The first thing that I realized that a lot of the key information just existed inside people's heads throughout the organization. So I started out interviewing many people, not only in the fundraising department, but throughout many departments in the organization. And I just said, tell me anything in terms of what have we done, what worked, what didn't work, who should we start with? Who is our inner circle? I'd be amazed of all these people that they would say like, oh, this person is totally interested in us. I'd go back into the database and there wasn't even a record on this person. So having those interviews definitely was a great way to kind of shed some light on learning more about that center of where to even start. I told these same people to make it as easy as possible for them. I want you to send me all the emails you have with donors or correspondences. Please give me access to your hard copies, the electronic files. You don't have to decipher it for me. I'm going to do my best to look at all that information. As soon as I find a key piece of information, oh, that person is interested in Alzheimer's, not in the database, that is interesting. oh, there was a salon event. I didn't realize that happened 3 years ago. Let me make sure all those names wind up in our database and put a connection of who is connected to who, all that type of information. I started looking at, well, where were there other flows of important information that weren't finding its way into my fundraising database? And there was a lot with the marketing department. So I teamed up with them in terms of who was on their website saying that they were interested in learning more, who was, when we were sending out emails, not only opening them, but clicking through them. I finally had access to that information to be a more clear indicator of not only is this person a good prospect in terms of how much they can donate, but they actually are leaning in. Other things in terms of the marketing department, I started looking at their magazines and annual reports. A lot of the times, the marketing team will take the time to do like a donor feature on a story, and I'll read it and be like, that's important information. Let me save these data points that the marketing team discovered for me that never made its way into the database. And then also kind of in that same idea of news articles, whether it's a news article coming out of our organization, or maybe a company spotlighted, a news organization spotlighted a gala that we have. Who attended that gala? Since I've been in San Diego for about over 15 years, do I recognize any of these people? Be like, oh, that's so-and-so. Is that person even in our database? Nope. Okay, that's good to know. Just trying to piece as many pieces of the puzzle together that I could. Okay, so what makes a beautiful painting? Finding that beautiful sweet spot. With any prospect, you want to ask yourself, not only ask yourself, but put yourself in a position to be able to monitor, record, and analyze these 3 questions. Does this prospect have a history of giving, regardless if it has nothing to do with your cause, even if it isn't child focus? Does this prospect, a little closer, does this prospect have a connection to my cause? Even better. And if they do fill in, if you can answer yes to these 2, these next 2 are the next 2 that you ask. Okay, that's great and all. Does this prospect have enough wealth to contribute a major gift? And if they are in or just close enough to that sweet spot, not everyone has to be in that sweet spot. Sometimes the fundraiser can get them to that point. You want to ask, what is our pathway to get in front of them? And that's when I was talking about relationships of who can open the doors, who are the gatekeepers to get to these people. Okay, we have the general outlines. We're all excited. The data is starting to flow in. It's all centralized. It's all going in the same consistent manner. I'm feeling much better now. About a year later, this was actually a very big commitment on behalf of XYZ Foundation. But now it's time to add some beautiful bright color. And that's where we're going to kind of get to that treasure chest. So how do you do that? Your primary colors, red, blue, and yellow. You want to look at that propensity, affinity, and capacity, and make sure each one of those has a home in your database that you are able to understand and share that information with others. In this sense, in this case, mostly fundraisers and or the head of your organization. So what are your reds? They help you determine if this person is interested in charity. And that is usually through prospect research. You usually are 3 different ways you can find out about this person, that if they just have any interest in changing the world and somehow, that they're passionate, that usually if they're doing 1 or more of these things, that is a positive indicator. They're donating money. Does this prospect have a history of charitable giving, regardless if it's aligned with your cause? Just because they haven't given to a child-focused organization yet, doesn't mean they won't in the future. Political giving is a far greater likelihood that if someone is giving political donations, they are far more likely to support a charity. And that has been supported by a lot of research in the area of philanthropy. Have they formed their own family foundation or advisory fund? Of course, if you find that information, they're going to have more of a chance to be interested in your charity. It's not a slam dunk, but you're moving in the right direction. In terms of time and experience, are they involved with their community, whether it be volunteering, political activism? Have they served on boards or advisory councils before? Or is there anything about their life experience, their employment history, their educational background, professional association memberships that they belong to, that maybe think, okay, this person might be the right fit? This is not going to say, if they answer yes to all these questions, that just means you've checked off the first box. Now you move on to the next box. These are your blues to help you determine if this person does have a clear connection to your cause. And the best one is the people that already exist in your database. Your, as many of you have probably heard, your best future donors are your current donors. So take that group first before looking at any external resources. You really want to look at their giving history. If you know how to do an RFM score in terms of recency, frequency, and monetary value, that you just notice that, has anyone ever stopped to look at this person in our database? They made their intro gift in 1995 at $100. 10 years later, they moved up to $5,000. And then I noticed for the past 3 years that they've been giving at the $10,000 level. I'm looking at the actions here, and I'm not seeing any indication that we've ever really picked up the phone, really did a sincere thank you for their years of consistent upgrades. Chances are that this person, if asked properly, could make an even more major gift if you really were more mindful of that relationship. But someone really has to be looking at that chronology of gifts to make those choices. Because chances are, if they're not maybe a good major gift prospect, they could be an excellent planned giving prospect. Other information I talked about in terms of engagement, event RSVPs, and participation. You want to make sure that you're using, I know everyone uses a different database, but I call them constituent codes. And what is their past or current affiliation with your organization? Whether they were a former student, a former postdoc, volunteer, a trustee, an advisory member, that is going to help determine how close they are to your cause and whether they should be in a portfolio. I talked about a few of these in terms of things that you're getting from your marketing department, e-communication, signups, opens, and click-throughs. Are they following you on social media? And something that I even do is anytime, just because this is how my brain works, anytime that we post amazing discovery out of XYZ Foundation, I'll go to our Facebook page and be like, who likes it? Like, oh, I recognize that name. I had no indication that I knew this person's a donor, but I didn't realize that they are that engaged, that they're following us on social media and reading about our news stories. And I put that indicator in there that this person that I know has capacity has evidence that they are leaning in more. Other times it could be responses to mailed appeals. And the last one is they self-identify this information, whether it is on a remit they send back with their donation, to say, I'm interested in planned giving. I've seen this before where someone just flat out say, I'm interested in making a planned gift. I'll see that sometimes it's in the database and I'll be like, did we ever close that loop? Did we ever do anything there? So making sure that you're seizing all your opportunities. And then as you talk to more individuals, as you have conversations, even not like official tours, casual conversations of people who explain to you why they have an interest in your cause. Make sure that gets to the appropriate person that records it to help you determine this might be a good prospect. You're also going to want to look at external charitable giving. Are they already supporting an organization with a similar mission? And if possible, try to find out exactly what that gift supported, because that's really going to help to say, okay, I know it's great and all that they support children's causes, but in this case, did it have to do with child education? Did it have to do with child abuse, child poverty, specifically for foster children? If you are able to answer that information, it's not only good to say they made $1 million gift to this child-focused organization, put in that extra effort to say, this is what this gift was used for. Even if it's a gift that has nothing to do with your organization, that they supported an art museum and there's a gallery named after them. This at least tells you this is the type of person that likes to put their name on things. Maybe they're more of a social person. So it does lend more intelligence to you and to the team. And then what is their personal connection to your cause? A lot of times you can't do this through prospect research. Sometimes there's articles out there where people self-identify information, but you usually kind of learn this information along the way in terms of the qualification and discovery stage with a prospect. What is their belief system? What is their life story and their motivations? To the core of them, why would they support your organization? In your case, were they a foster child and or have they adopted a foster child? Things like that are going to be real clear indicators of when you start speaking to this person, how you should be talking about them, because you understand why they're so passionate about their cause. finding the motivation is a clear way to get to a successful solicitation. And someone might be close to someone that is already passionate about your cause. What I've learned, again, I will say this is not always a slam dunk, but people who are like-minded usually walk in the same circles. So if you have someone that is already leaning in, already making significant gifts, and you find out that they are friends, serve on the same board as someone, there's some direct relationship with that person, that is usually a good indicator of, well, let me ask my friend in the inner circle if they can make that introduction, because since they are friends or close with or a family member of that person, they might say, okay, I will at least see what your foundation is all about. And that's where you'd sell them on the impact that your organization makes. Okay, we found out if they're interested in charities at all. We found out if there's any connection that they would be interested in your cause. Now we have to help determine their baseline net worth and capacity. I share this, I mentioned that I am not like the CIA, FBI. I don't have access to people's bank accounts. I just have to go with the information that's out there to do my best conservative estimate of kind of where this person lands. The best starter for that is real estate. If they have no address or a bad address in your database, be proactive in seeking that out. If they're a current donor, it's so important that someone in your organization picks up the phone, sends an email. We'd love to update our records. That is not only excellent for future prospect screening, but obviously it makes sure that they are constantly getting your materials and keeping engaged in that way, getting your magazines, getting your annual reports. And real estate ownership is a good starting point. It typically indicates about 25% of someone's net worth. And a lot of that information is out there with free resources, which I will share later, a list of free resources you all can use. You might want to look at their profession, especially if they're with a publicly traded company. I just dealt with this today where someone said, I'm surprised this person wants to have a meeting with me. And this guy is the CEO of a publicly traded company. I have access to exactly how much stock he has sold in the past 10 years. I know what his financial compensation is. So I'm very comfortable to say, based on what I know about this person has a net worth at least in the $50 to $100 million range, based on their real estate, stock earnings, annual income, and they have the capacity to make a gift in at least the $1 to $5 million range. Other things is, are they an angel investor? If they are the head of an organization or maybe part of that C-suite, sometimes you're going to want to try to catch a rising star. And that's why it's so important. I literally do this every morning. I live in San Diego. I deal with a lot of prospects over in Florida. I try to read the front page section, the business section, and the socialite section of those two towns to really get a sense of who's out there that's not on everyone's radar. We talked about those same 10 to 5 people that everyone's thinking about. If I read an article of someone who works in a company that is relevant to what we're doing at XYZ Foundation, and maybe they are 35 years old, I want to catch a rising star, because I want it to become to the point where that person becomes a millionaire, a billionaire, and everyone's like, oh, I wish we can get to so-and-so. We've been there, done that. We engaged that person, and that person is on our board. We got them. So that is part of my mentality as well, is who's showing a promising future as well. And sometimes it doesn't work, whatever they plan to do, whether it's the next big app, in technology or whatever, sometimes it fails, but you at least want to put yourself in a place that once everyone gets their attention and they're on the front page news that they did this amazing thing, that they now are a publicly traded company, you're in a position to, you're ahead of the game, that you've already introduced yourself and your organization to this person. Annual income represents about 10% of a person's net worth, and stock holdings represent about 33% of a person's net worth. So if you can figure out those 3 things, you're really getting a clear indicator of where this person's at. Other times, information about who owns a yacht, who owns an aircraft, believe it or not, through wealth screening tools, you can learn about that. You find out who actually has an airplane registered in their name. Obviously, if they have their own private jet, they probably not probably, they do have enough money to make us a meaningful gift to your organization. And other ones, it could just be simply by just looking at a person and just learning more about them. You visited their home. They have beautiful contemporary art. They're driving the fanciest of cars. They have beautiful jewelry. It's obviously that this person has expendable income. So the chances of asking them to make a gift of a starter gift in the $50,000 range doesn't seem like too far-fetched. Based on what I've learned about this person, they can absolutely do it. So if you got them close enough to your organization, you feel comfortable of lining up the appropriate ask. In terms of past giving, I give the example of external giving. This happens all the time for me. I will look up someone in one of my wealth screening tools and it'll say, Mr. Smith has a net worth in the $1 to $5 million range with the capacity to make a gift in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. But I just read a news article that this person just made $1 million gift to San Diego State University. No one that has a net worth in the $1 to $5 million range is making $1 million gifts. Maybe there's an exception to the rule, but 99.9% of the time, it's someone who maybe has some hidden wealth. We don't know the full story. If someone's making $1 million one-time gift, I'm going to conservatively say, I believe this person is in the $10 to $50 million range with the demonstrated capacity. That's even better. I'm not saying, I guess they can make a gift in the $1 to $5 million range. I say they have the demonstrated capacity to make a gift in that range. Sometimes as you learn more about people, you might go down on that net worth and capacity, and other times you're going to go way up. As that company becomes publicly traded, you learn more insight into their financial compensation. That can go way up. And then you get into the people who like, no, this person can make a $10 to $25 million gift. You also want to look at their assets and their foundation. In a similar way, sometimes they'll say Mr. Smith has a net worth in the 1 to 5 range, but I notice he has a foundation, and that family foundation that he set up has $25 million in assets. This is all public information that any of us can access. So again, I feel completely comfortable from moving them. The database currently says 1 to 5. I just learned they have their own family foundation. I am putting them in that $10 to $50 million range. Until I learn more about them, I'm going to be very conservative. They could be in that 50 to 100. They could be in that $100 to $500 million range. But until I know that information, I always kind of lean towards being conservative as possible. The great news about people who are billionaires, Forbes tracks all the billionaires. It's usually any billionaire has their own Wikipedia page. That information is usually very easy to find. And usually there's people like Forbes doing the work for me. In my case, we are dealing with billionaires. So I do keep a pulse of, okay, whose wealth has gone up, whose wealth has gone down. Sometimes there's dramatic shifts where, any billionaire is great, but we have them as coded as a net worth of $1 billion. Now they're at $25 billion. This is a whole new ballgame. This is someone that can make a transformative gift. The last bullet point is kind of similar to people walking in the same circles. And I'll say this isn't a surefire sign, but when we were talking about kind of people who walk in the same circles, have like-minded interests, usually people who are of similar capacities, net worths, also kind of walk in the same circles. So if you have someone that you absolutely know is in the $100 to $500 million range, and you didn't know he was connected to this other person in your database, but you happen to read the socialite section, like, oh, they're sitting at the same table at this gala. They must be closer to each other. I never really gave this person too much thought, but now let me kind of dig a little deeper down the rabbit hole, because if this person is friends with that person, there's a good chance, it's not always a slam dunk, this person might have some wealth as well. It's that same idea of like-minded people do walk in the same circles from my experience. Not always foolproof. Okay, so we got our primary colors. Now we're talking about the full spectrum of your palette. For the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about all of these, but really determine your organization's bandwidth, what information you do have access to, and if you can find a home for some of these data points, it's really going to help lend insight into your strategies. I will say the most important is those relationships pathways. When I started at XYZ Foundation, there was no mapping of relationships. I had to start somewhere. I started out with the CEO, kind of think of it like a web, a spider web. At the core was the CEO and the board members. And I just said, who do they know? Who are they related with? Who can they introduce us to? Who do they serve on other boards with? And all of a sudden, this web of relationships started out with 10 to 20 people. Now, all of a sudden, I'm at 1,000 people. Fast forward years later, I have thousands of connections, and I know how everyone is connected to each other. That as soon as a prospect that was cold, all of a sudden, surprisingly, shows up to an event, I'll be like, that's great. He showed up to this event. He signed up for this seminar. Even better, he's friends with this person who's in our inner circle. Fundraiser, let's go. Let's do this. There's nothing stopping us. So I can't stress how important it is to really capture how everyone is related to each other in your database if they have some kind of direct relationship to each other. For the sake of time, I'm just going to mention the last two here, that if you do have the ability to know people's birth dates and find out their ages, that really does help paint the picture of who is in your database. When you send out those mass emails or mass snail mails, is it going to people that are in their 40s and 50s that have children that are in high school and college? Is it people nearing retirement age? Is it people that are post-retirement, 70s or 80s? This was a question at XYZ Foundation. We're like, we think these people, these donors have this age, but once we actually were proactive about it and collecting that information to the best of our ability, we discovered that like our typical donor is someone who's around, I think in our case, between like 70 and 72 years old. And that was great in terms of identifying, once I was able to identify what the typical donor looks like in our database and what qualities, what things about them I already found out about them, then I look at an external list and then match to see, well, these people are very alike. They're the same age, they have similar interests, similar capacity. They're kind of walking in the same circles. There's a high likelihood that this person can make a gift to our organization. And here are just some other data points that could be helpful in terms of an employer. If they have a matching gift program, your organization could be proactive. They make a gift. You have a business rule. As soon as they make a gift, a reminder comes up. This person works at Apple who has a matching gift program. So maybe your corporate officer or someone else in your team will say, did you realize you can make your gift go farther? You can literally double your gift by utilizing your employer's matching gift program, things like that. Okay, so at XYZ Foundation, we started out with a complete mess. I was overwhelmed, but I had to start somewhere. I had to get to that blank canvas, and now it's where the fun begins. I started collecting all those moving dots and putting together, trying to make sense. All of a sudden, it is starting to come together, but we're not quite there yet. Now there's that snowball effect. The information is flowing in, and we're learning more about other people. We're trying to find any opportunity to optimize and enhance our data. And now we have what I call a beautiful piece of art, but our work is never done. We can always be improving. So what are the results of mastering how to paint at XYZ Foundation? These are all true cases in terms of making that investment. The size of the database has literally more than doubled, with millions of data points and wealth indicators that never existed before. So with a far larger, enriched database, revenue has more than doubled. And you're no longer, and it's a very diversified group of prospects. So we're not worrying about donor fatigue. There's some of those donors who are still making those meaningful gifts. They've been with our organization for 20 years. You always know that $1 million gift is going to come up. But when we have a new opportunity, we're not going to ask that same person anymore. There's no reason to. We have 1,000 other people that realistically we can ask that person to support that opportunity. Okay, so your database has grown. It's become enriched. More money has come in. Now things become a little more possible that you moved in that right direction. When I started with this philanthropy team, we were being generous. We were a team of 3 to 4 people, and now we have grown to 16. Our support staff has grew. I have people that work under me that enable me to do more data enrichment, to serve more fundraisers, and there's just many more opportunities happening than were ever considered possible before. An ever-growing audience of new high net worth individuals. I'm not embellishing here. This includes billionaires getting engaged to the point that they are joining our board, attending events, and making significant or transformative of events. I'm surprised sometimes that we'll just have a virtual webinar, and part of my job, I wouldn't say part of my job, just how I act. I always look at the RSVP list, like, ooh, I know that person. Ooh, I know that person from a previous job. And then I'll look at like, did that person really just RSVP for this event? This billionaire that I didn't know was interested in us? This has actually happened before. And this has resulted in significant engagement and cultivation. Now, every fundraiser has a diverse portfolio of prospects and a large back burner of prospects. So it's kind of a churning game. Every prospect is not going to be a slam dunk. As you do the discovery and qualification, you're like, it looked like a good idea, it looked like a good try, but whatever we learned, they're more interested in this cause. They're not going to be interested in ours. That doesn't mean that there isn't a next prospect at bat to say, okay, that's fine. Let's move on. Let's record it in the system that this person doesn't have an interest in us. Maybe we'll put a reminder in 5 years to circle back with that person to see if their circumstances have changed. But for the time being, it is important information to know that this person is right now not a prospect. All right, let's look at our back burner. Who next makes sense for the opportunities that you're trying to achieve in terms of funding opportunities? And that's where I come in and look at what I call my back burner of literally thousands of prospects. The reason I have a back burner of thousands is because I'm trying to look at people who make major gifts, annual gifts, planned gifts, corporate and foundation grants. So kind of across the spectrum. So I literally have a back burner of at least somewhere in the 1,000 to 2,000 range. Practically every question can be answered now to help guide data-driven strategy. No one's scratching their head anymore. And believe me, there was a lot of head scratching the first year. Someone would pose a question and we'd all just kind of be like a deer in headlights, but I don't know. Now it just feels like you ask a question, we're going to figure it out. We're going to get a strategy together because we believe so much in our data that our data is so strong that nothing seems impossible. And kind of with that leads into the last bullet point, that now we just feel like we're prepared to move into new markets. And that's something that happened at Voices for Children for many different reasons. They felt like, our shop is so much in order that we're ready to expand into Riverside County while I was there. I know they still serve Riverside County. We're in a similar position. We're like, let's not think small anymore. We know for a fact we have people in the Bay Area and New York City. We have indicators that they are interested in what we're doing and they can make a major gift. Let's set up some salon events there. Let's hire fundraisers that live in those areas. Now we're thinking, a few years ago, we're scratching our heads of who do we even ask? Who's in our backyard? Now we're thinking about, I want to even say just across the country. A lot of times we're even thinking about global, people that live in other countries. So I'm just going to leave this right here. I'm not going to go over this for the sake of time, but if you're talking about, not having a budget for doing some of these things, this is where you can start with. So I'm going to talk about this very briefly because again, this could be an entire different presentation. There's so much to this. You want to make sure that you have a moves management program in place to really track where a prospect is at any stage. I'll just read the definition for anyone that's not clear. It's an organizational approach to major donor relationships. It's a way to track and engage with your donors and prospects as they interact with your nonprofit, guiding them to a new major gift. So this is, everyone maybe does it a little different, but every person that is in a portfolio should be in one of these stages. That someone who's in my back burner portfolio is probably going to be in the identification, research, or strategy phase. We're learning about them. We're not at the point where we feel comfortable to get in front of them. Then you get the fundraiser involved, and obviously he or she is working on the strategy with you based on what you learned about them, the discovery, qualification, whether they actually are interested in your organization. If they are, the cultivation stage, where you're building that relationship to hopefully a successful solicitation. You're going to have it tagged in your database where there's a chronology of actions leading up to that successful solicitation that you can measure to see how well fundraisers are doing, that if as a team, we're doing enough to make sure, like, as I said in the beginning, that no one's falling through the cracks, saying, you qualified this person a year ago, they indicated that they were interested in us, but I only see there's 2 touches that we've done, 2 attempts to really engage this person. Maybe we need to, this always happens with prospects. You have one prospect that leans in way heavily and they monopolize a lot of your time. You want to make sure as a fundraiser that you're spreading the love and giving everyone the appropriate amount of time. A great way to do that is always making sure to set up a list of future actions. As soon as you always complete one step, take the time to record the next thing you're going to do. Even if you're not sure, it should ideally build upon what you learned about this person. This next step makes sense. At the very least, put in your database, 3 months from now, I need a reminder that I need to do something with this prospect to make sure that they stay warm towards the path of that successful solicitation proposal. A good prospect researcher, manager, or even I keep on using prospect research, but even if you have a database administrator that is bought in and is mindful of things like data enrichment, that it is not just someone who's entering in the gifts, updating contact information. This person should be partnered with the fundraiser every step of the way, not just in those beginning stages I was talking about. This should be the kind of their partner in crime, their wingman that I talked about, to really help them set them up for success. Because fundraisers, even though they're debriefed in the beginning, they're not going to remember everything. That you have to make sure that reminder that, have you tried this route with this person? No, you haven't. So let's try this strategy instead. So my last thing I'm just going to mention is to my fellow prospect researchers is this is how I think of myself as a prospect researcher. This is how I measure or look to hire people who are the right prospect researchers. And this is kind of the hallmarks of everything I was talking about. A good prospect researcher should always be curious, never stop exploring. There's all these moving dots in the air. They need to make sure that they're not only collecting the dots, but connecting them in a way that makes sense and sharing that with the fundraisers in a way that they're able to digest. Always be recommending, never stop collaborating, understand that your work is never done. The more accurate the data is, the greater the intelligence and the more positive outcomes you're going to see. Define success and how well you set up others for success. I can have a work of art of a database. I know all these things, all this insight, but if I'm not able to take that information and set up a fundraiser to take that intel and strategy and turn that into action, into a successful solicitation, I know it means nothing. So defines a fundraiser gets $1 million gift. I played a part in that. That's how I define my own success. And in time, you will appreciate how much the organization values your guidance in seeing those insights and then seeing the actual tangible results of all your hard work. Thank you so much. Good luck with your own endeavors, and please do keep in touch.
Eric, thank you so much. That is just a whirlwind of information. I think everybody
trying to cram it all in.
I know there's so much to say, but we will distribute this presentation with all these links and contacts, so not to worry about that. Yeah. We're just so grateful to you, Eric, and so appreciate all your knowledge and sharing it with us. We will, if you have questions, you can always reach out to Jody, to me, to any of us. And as a reminder, Quentin put the link to the survey in the chat. So before you hop off the line, if you could just click on that, we would be really grateful. We'll also send it out in a follow-up email. And there will be a recording of this talk and also the presentation sent out. So anyway, thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.
Great pleasure to see you, and so proud of all your achievements.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.